To this Gecko 2024 tutorial on benchmarking and analyzing optimization heuristics with IOH Profiler. I'm Diederik Vermetten and I will be giving this tutorial on behalf of the whole IOH Profiler team, which includes among others Carola Dor, Jacob de Nobel, Thomas Beck, and many more people that could not all fit on this tutorial slide. And the goal of this is to start with going over a bit of benchmarking in general, and then show you how IOH Profiler can fit into different kinds of benchmarking pipelines and hopefully help you simplify your own benchmarking setups in several different ways. And in the latter part of the tutorial, we will go over some of the ways in which IOH Profiler as a project has helped us with different kinds of studies and different functionalities and ways that we have been able to use it to further our own research, teaching, and many different collaborations as well. Is obviously the idea of benchmarking, and given that you are here listening to a Gecko tutorial, I hope that it's not a far stretch to assume that you agree that, at least in some extent, benchmarking is a key component of a lot of the work that we do when developing or testing or using optimization algorithms. Because we need some way to be able to judge the effectiveness of our algorithms relative to other algorithms or to the state of the art in general. So if we, for example, propose a new algorithm, then we're expected to show that there's a reason for this, that we don't just add something that will never be useful. So we have to show that it works on some specific type of problem better than some other sets of algorithms. And that's usually what people think of when they hear benchmarking. Then they think of benchmarking as something to show that my algorithm is better than the other ones. But I hope that throughout this tutorial, I can give you a bit of a feeling for why benchmarking is not just some number that shows that algorithm A is better than algorithm B. Benchmarking goes a lot farther than just this competitive showing that one algorithm is better than the others. And I hope to be able to illustrate this to you in some nice interactive examples as well, to show you that things that we collect from our algorithms can do a lot more than just saying that one might be slightly better than another. So there are a few different ways in which benchmarking can go beyond this competitive aspect. Because benchmarking is a tool that can be used to give us insights about algorithms and problems. If we benchmark an algorithm on a wide variety of problems, we have a way of seeing, oh, these problems see the same kind of behavior as algorithm, and these ones show different kind of behavior. So there must be some kind of difference between these problems. So there's a way that we can identify what makes this problem different from the other ones. So benchmarking can help us identify commonalities and differences between sets of problems and also between sets of algorithms. The common thing is saying which one might be better in average, but if one is good on type of problem A and the other is good on type of problem B, that gives you insight into their functionality and into their specific strengths and weaknesses. So we can combine these things together to get a real view of the interplay between problems and algorithms. If we just look at one problem in isolation or one algorithm in isolation, that kind of limits what we can do. But by being able to vary both of these components, we can look at what happens when we let an algorithm run on a problem. What characteristics of the problem make the algorithm behave differently, what characteristics of the algorithm make it work differently on different problems. And then we can identify differences in performance and this gives rise to different potentials for development. So if we see that some algorithms perform well on type A and not on type B, and the other way around, that is something that might inspire us to either make an algorithm that works well on both of these. But in many other cases, rather it guides data-driven studies of things like algorithm selection, algorithm configuration, or even things like switching between algorithms, where we see that one algorithm performs well in finding a good basin of attraction, but then fails to converge well. Another is very good at converging once it's found the basin, but gets stuck early. So why not switch between these? So by looking at performance data, we can identify different regions of complementarity, different parts of problems where algorithms might benefit from being combined together. So this is just a subsampling of things that benchmarking can be useful for, rather than this competitive starting point. But in order to get the required insights from benchmarking, we need to make sure that benchmarking is actually usable. There's more to benchmarking than just saying, oh, this is the final solution that I have found. So in order to do benchmarking in a robust way and to make benchmarking usable and applicable to a wide variety of use cases, it first of all has to be accessible. We don't want everyone to have to reinvent the wheel for every paper that they write. We want to have tools that work for a variety of different scenarios. They should be accessible, easy to work with, and they should be flexible to the requirements of the user. Because if I have a benchmarking study I want to run, and you have a benchmarking study that you want to run, that probably will not overlap 100%. So we should be able to change things around without requiring too much effort. And one of the things that we should be able to change around is what kind of tools that we use. And if I want to use my tool for gathering, for accessing the objective function, and you want to use your objective function, that's something that should not stop us from both using the same kind of data visualization in the end. So interoperability is a very common aiming point for us. We really want to have benchmarking be something where you can make decisions not for one monolithic framework that you use for everything, but rather I take this component from here, and I take this component from there, and I take this from there, and I can easily integrate them all with each other. And I do this in some kind of standardized way so that I ensure that things are reproducible. So I can easily note down, oh, I have used this version, I can just attach this to a repository, and this is the bit of code I use to generate my data, this is the bit of code I use to process it, this is the bit of code I use to visualize it, and that together makes my reproducibility a lot less effort to achieve. So these are our goals with creating benchmarking software. And this is how we get to the overview of the IOH profiler as a whole. So schematically, IOH profiler looks a bit like this. There's separate components to it, which are highlighted here in blue. And each of these components can be taken and accessed on its own, or you can integrate them into a larger pipeline for doing whatever benchmarking setup you want to do. So if we start looking at the core component, so this gray box is the real focus of the IOH profiler project as from the start. We have the IOH experimenter, which is the thing that basically adds the data logging and the common interfaces for problems and allows algorithms to work with it. So it's really the down in the dirt benchmarking environment where you do your experiments. And then we have, as a separate module, the IOH analyzer, which allows for interactive visualization of algorithm behavior, different kinds of analyses, different kinds of performance measures, etc. based on data that you can generate, for example, with IOH Experimenter, but also from different kinds of repositories. So from repositories that we host, but also from BBOB or COCO's repository, from Nevergrad, etc., etc. So each of these boxes you can swap out for different things, and you can still have interesting benchmarking pipelines. So this is also the case for different problems. You can use the problems that we have integrated directly, but you can also use your own problem generator or your own set of problems that you're interested in. So you can swap this out. You can use algorithms that we provide direct interfaces to, or you can just use whatever algorithm framework you're currently looking at. And you can always add on additional tools to this pipeline. So things like algorithm configuration, feature extraction, different analyses, other tools. All of this are just components of a larger benchmarking pipeline, but our focus is on ensuring that experimentation and analysis can be done for a wide variety of different use cases. The first aspect of this of IOH Profiler that we want to highlight in more detail is the IOH Analyzer. So this is the analysis and visualization of benchmark data. And this is really built from the viewpoint that performance is something that cannot be captured in just a single number. So analysis of your algorithm's performance or behavior on a certain benchmark is very context dependent. The performance measures I'm interested in might not be the ones that you care about, might be different from ones that someone else cares about, but all of these can be valid options. So to a very large extent, the design of this is influenced by the specific requirements of the user. So what exactly you want to do with your data depends on your use case, depends on your specific question that your benchmarking study is supposed to answer. So this is why flexibility is key, and why we have developed IOH Analyzer in the first place as a web page. So it's accessible by everyone and flexible enough to be able to change around different performance measures, different perspectives, etc. on the same set of data. So you can really interactively explore your data and see what happens if you change different aspects of your analyses. The best way to highlight what IOH Analyzer offers is via showing you an interactive demo. So I will show you something you can follow along with on the IOH Analyzer website if you are interested. And we will go over a few of the different aspects of performance, and then after the demo we will zoom into a bit of more detail on some of these aspects and design decisions that are made when choosing different visualizations. So this is the page that you find when you go to the IOH Analyzer website, or when you install it and run it locally yourself. You see some bit of information in general about the analyzer to get you a bit of an idea of what you can expect to find, some links to documentation, etc. And here you have the two main ways of loading in data into the analyzer. The first is to upload data yourself. So if you have collected data, for example, using IOH Experimenter, which we will show later on in this tutorial, or if you've collected data with COCO or Nevergrad or some of these other platforms that we support, you can load it in directly. Alternatively, if you have just collected data in some other way, and you can turn it into some CSV file, just for example with number of function evaluations and function value as the two columns, and load that in as well by just enabling this checkbox, and then you can load your own CSV and give a bit of information about what each column is, and that will allow you to work with quite a few different types of data format. In this tutorial, however, I will not load in any custom data. I will just look at data that is already publicly available. In this case, I will focus on the BBOB suite from COCO. We have a copy of their data loaded in as well. So if you want to use that, you can just select BBOB as the source for the data. select what sets exactly you want, which here corresponds to the algorithm. So if I want the CMA, I can just look for CMA, and the PSO, I can look for PSO, and the DE. So I have these different algorithms that I can load in. I can choose the functions, so there are 24 BBOB functions, so they're just numbered. I can choose the problem dimensionalities, so let's say I want to remove a few, then I just do this. So I remove these, and I can load this in, and then it will do some processing to get this data from our repository, and it will show up here in our list of processed data. You see different entries for each function dimensionality algorithm combination. We see a bit of information where it took it from. And with this loaded in, we can go and start looking at the actual functionality in terms of analyzing this data. We can start with a general overview here on the left to see what kind of data have we loaded in. So just overview over what functions do we have and what kind of performance can we see on those, or on individual functions, which we can always select in the left-hand side. We can see what are the number of evaluations that were used, or what kind of function values were recorded. So with that in mind, we can now start going more in detail on this data. For example, by starting with a basic fixed budget view, where we look at what kind of function value have I reached with increasing number of function evaluations. Then we see the plot loaded here. Again, this is for a single function, as it says here. So we have here the choice to select which function and which dimensionality we want to show it for. And we see that by default, this has been showing an arithmetic mean of function value. Since this is BBOB, maybe it makes more sense to me to look at a geometric mean. I can turn that on. I can look at both of them together, or I can look at just one. Or I can change to medians, to quartile ranges, or even just show individual runs of these algorithms to compare them. And then we can get a sense of, okay, on this function, it seems that the particle swarm optimizer converges a bit slower than the other ones, and CMA outperforms DE a bit as well. We can change the function easily, so we can go to function 2, for example, and so on, and just change depending on what exactly we are trying to show. We can change the settings here. We can look at this from different viewpoints. We can look at, for example, distributions of function value at selected budgets, in terms of heat maps that you can play around with, or in terms of density functions, so violin plots of function values at a certain budget. So I can look at, after 100 evaluations, what kind of function values have I reached. And we see that the distribution of CMA is quite a bit below that of the other algorithms here. This is showing data for an individual function. We can do the same for multiple functions. We can get overviews, like just having a grid over all functions of how does my algorithm converge. Like here we show the convergence of 1. We can say I want to compare CMA to DE specifically, and I can refresh this figure to see that. And this gives us a nice overview of, okay, on this function CMA seems to be a bit better, on this function DE seems to be a bit better. So then I can go back to the individual function and see, okay, what are the differences when I want to zoom in on this one thing in particular. And we can do this not only for this fixed budget viewpoint, we can flip our perspective and look at a fixed target viewpoint, look at how many functions do I need, evaluations do I need to reach certain targets. And that we can again do in different ways. So some people like to have expected running time, some people like to have a penalized average running time, means, quantiles, medians, certain fixed probability lines, etc. All of these are possible depending on your analysis. So that's kind of the main idea of this, is that different people have different ways in which they want to look at their performance data. There's a lot of information in all of these trajectories, so we should be able to look at these in a rather flexible way. And then when you have your setting that you are happy with and you want to save this figure, you can always just download it as either PDFs, PNGs, SVGs, etc. The same goes for tables. If I go to a summary table, so I want to get my overview of runtime statistics at a given target value, then I can also just save this as a CSV or as a LaTeX table directly, or as several of these other data formats. And if you have data where you record more than just performance, you can also look at the distribution of parameters over time. That is not something that is present in all of the datasets. So these datasets from that I've loaded here do not have parameters. So there's nothing that will show up here. We only have fitness. But if I had other parameters, then I could get plots of how fitness or how budget relates to the parameter value. We can also do different types of aggregations of performance. For example, the popular cumulative distribution plots, the ECDFs, where we have certain targets we specify and we look at what proportion of runs reach certain proportions of targets. And we can change what targets we use. For example, BBOB generally uses a set of 51 logarithmically spaced targets that are predefined. So we can select the standard BBOB target set and get these cumulative distributions over the set of functions we include here. We can also aggregate over dimensions if we want to, or do different kind of scalings, different number of targets, etc. So everything here is flexible to play around with. And then the final perspective I want to just show you here is the empirical attainment-based perspective. So rather than fixed budget or fixed target, we can have a empirical attainment function where we can visualize the performance of an algorithm in this 2D space with the probability that a certain quality is attained within a certain number of function evaluations. And we can then again do different kinds of aggregations with this and different kinds of comparisons between them and calculate EAF-based cumulative distribution functions to get, for example, anytime performance measures. So there's quite a few different viewpoints of performance that you can take. And for all of this, there's also settings that you can modify to change what kind of visualizations you get. So you can change color schemes. You can upload your own color scheme if you are so inclined. All of these plotting settings can be changed, but also some of the underlying mechanisms. For example, we currently look at algorithm as the thing that is used to make our IDs, but if we have different parameters tracked, which you can do with IOH experimenter, you can also integrate those in your IDs, or you can choose to use function names instead of numbers if that's more convenient, etc. So this is just a sense of the overview that you can get for IOH analyzer. And now we will go back to the presentation to highlight a few of these different perspectives in a bit more detail. Now that we've seen an overview of the functionality of the IOH analyzer, let's look a bit more in detail about what all of these things actually say about our performance data. So the basis of algorithm performance is some plots like the one you see here on the right. It is some running time measure, usually number of function evaluations, that is on the x-axis here, and some objective value or quality or something like this on the y-axis. And in this case, we are trying to maximized. So as we get more evaluations, then our best function value we find increases. The question now is if we want to aggregate this data from the many gray lines into one overall performance so that we can easily compare between different algorithms, then what kind of perspective should we consider? And how does this influence the kind of results we get? Well, one way you could go is to go with a fixed budget approach, which means that you cut at every running time and you aggregate those values together. But you can also take the orthogonal approach, where you cut at every target value. But here you get some questions that start to show up regarding how do you actually do the aggregation across a certain target value, because you might have some runs that do not even reach this line. So just taking an average here is skewing your data in some way. So depending on what kind of aggregation you're using or what kind of perspective you're looking at your data with, you get different questions that you need to answer when visualizing your performance. You can start with the fixed target analysis, where we can see running time as a random variable. So we have fixed a certain target, and the amount of evaluations we reached is a random variable of which we have some amount of observations. We have our runs, and these runs can be either successful in that they are not infinite, or they can be unsuccessful, in which case we can say they needed infinite time, we never reached them. We can count things like the number of successes as one way to aggregate this data, and then taking this into account, we can look at things like expected running time, so the expectation of this variable, which we can estimate based on the success rate and the average number of evaluations needed for the successful runs. We can look at penalized average run times, so we take averages, but then instead of saying we have this infinite for unsuccessful runs, we have some penalty. We can look at confidence intervals, etc., etc. So different ways of aggregating the same data will lead you to slightly different performance measures. And as I showed in IOH Analyzer, we have quite a few different ways of looking at this fixed target perspective. You can look at comparing the distributions of the hitting times, and give you with different statistical tests. You can get heat maps like this. You can look at actual distributions of the amount of evaluations needed. You can look at expected running times, cumulative versions of this, etc. Similar things are true for the fixed budget analysis. Here our function value is our random variable, parameterized by a certain budget value. We have again a certain number of runs of this, a certain number of observations, and we can again then start aggregating this data in different ways. For example, these tabular data that you've seen, we can look at for a given function, for a given runtime, what is the mean, median, different quantiles of performance for these different sets of algorithms. Go to cumulative density functions, so we can specify, for example, a single target, and we want to know how many of our runs reach this target in a certain number of function evaluations. That gives us a plot like this that says that, well, the target we have chosen, 93% of the runs reached it in one evaluation of this green algorithm. But of course, since this is a proportion, we can do this for multiple targets as well. Targets, that becomes something that looks a bit like this. So we have multiple targets, so some fraction of the runs reach some fraction of the targets, which gives us a sense of overall over this function, over the targets that we're interested in, this many of them will reach within this amount of evaluations. The thing about these ECDS is that you can do the same thing, but aggregate not over just different targets on the same function, but over different functions with their own sets of targets. That gives you a sense of performance over wider sets of functions. So you can get a real sense of the overall trend of these algorithms. For example, here we have some pseudo-Boolean functions, and we can see that the black algorithm is very good at low budgets overall, while it then stagnates when the budgets become larger, and that's because this is a very greedy hill climber algorithm that is good at the beginning but then gets stuck very easily. So this allows you to get a sense of performance over many algorithms in one aggregated figure. And one final way of looking at this performance data that I want to highlight is using empirical attainment functions, where we see performance really as the three-dimensional shape that it is, where we have on the one hand a number of function evaluations, then we have our function value, our quality, and then the third axis is the probability that we reach this. So performance space can really be seen as this three-dimensional combination of probability, quality, and time. And that's visualized using these colors here, where you see that, for example, for a certain number of evaluations and a certain quality combination, there is a probability of a little bit more than 0 that we attain this quality within this number of evaluations. But when looking at more evaluations, then there's a probability of like 70% that we attain this quality within this budget over the set of functions that we have selected here. Because you can do this for a single function, but you can do this again also in an aggregated way across multiple functions. So this plot here is an aggregation over multiple functions of the attainment that we get. And highlighted in black are the different, some different quantiles, the 25, 50th, and 75% quantiles. So you can see one natural way to do an aggregation based on this that we are using in, for example, the fixed budget sense. But you can also see that this gives rise to different ways of looking at our data. For example, one thing we could do with these attainment functions is we could take differences between them. So we can really, in probability space, view where one algorithm is better than another. See in these types of figures, where we see two algorithms compared, and the blue region is where the probability of, where the attainment of one of the listed algorithm is better than that of the other one. So we can see that in the very beginning and in the very end, the CMAES is performing a lot better, but in this region here, in the medium budgets, the BFGS is outperforming it. And this is something that we can do between pairs of algorithms, but also between larger sets of algorithms, where we can look at portfolios, which is something that we can see in this figure here, where we see that the CMAES is good in this region, this Kobaila algorithm is good in this region here, BFGS here, and then DE is really not good in comparison to the best of this portfolio. So this is a recent addition to the IOH analyzer. We invite you to take a look at this, play around with it, let us know what you think and how you would want us to expand these kind of visualizations in future. Then to highlight some final functionality that we have available, we have things like statistical comparisons. We have different aggregated rankings, like based on ranking schemes like the GLICO2 ranking schemes. We can calculate different relative rankings across different sets of functions for different sets of targets. We have portfolio contributions based on ECDF contribution. We have the deep statistical comparison tool integrated, and we have even options for looking at parameters if we track them over the search. So that wraps up the IOH analyzer portion of this tutorial. Now we continue on to the experimenter, which is the module of IOH Profiler that you can use to do the actual benchmarking, to collect the data by integrating the problems and the algorithms together with our logging functionality. So the IOH experimenter consists of both a large set of benchmark problems and logging functionality to keep track of the data that you want to later on analyze in, for example, IOH Analyzer. So we have default settings for this. Logging can track performance and also dynamic parameters, storing them into files that are directly compatible with IOH Analyzer. It also can be modified to create customized CSVs for any specific task that you are interested in. And you don't necessarily have to use the benchmark problems that are integrated. You can also just use the logging in isolation and attach it to any kind of benchmark problem that you're interested in analyzing. So we are continuously extending this by integrating it natively with different algorithm frameworks, by continuously integrating different problems, and by using it in collaboration with other people to see how we can best make it accessible to the wider community. So we will start again, same as with the analyzer, with a demonstration of the functionality of IOH Experimenter before we then get into some of the design aspects of it and wrap up the tutorial by discussing the overarching ideas of the IOH Profiler project, different ways in which it can be used in settings like teaching, etc. Now I will demonstrate the core functionalities of IOH Experimenter using this notebook. So I'll be showing the Python version of the Experimenter, which is an interface built on top of the C++ implementation. So if you are someone who likes to use C++ instead, most of the structure of things will be the same, just with a different syntax. But we have other tutorials for that available as well. So to start off with, for the notebook, there's just a bit of bookkeeping code at the beginning to make sure that we run our tests properly. And just import this here. But the main thing is that we can just import our package when we have installed it from PyPy or GitHub directly. So it's a package that's available on PyPI, so we can see what version we have. Here we have version 0.3.14, and it has relatively few requirements, so it's a relatively lightweight package in that sense. And once we've imported it, we can start using it. And the main part of this package is built around this problem class. So problem class exists for different variable types. So we have a different problem class for real valued and for integer valued problems. And we provide a lot of functionality around this that supports you in using different types of problems directly. So to see, for example, what problems are available within this package, we can do something like IOH, go to the problems. We're interested in real valued single objective problems and see what are the problems that are available. Then we get this dictionary that tells us, okay, problem number 1 is a sphere function, 2 is an ellipsoid, etc. So the first 24 are just the BBOB functions. And then you can see that in addition to this, we also have some star discrepancy problems available by default. So that if we want to access one of these problems, all we need to do is say get problem. We can specify what problem we want to get, either by number or by name. We can specify what instance of this problem we want to use. So BBOB by default support instances. So a different instance gives you a different version of the problem with some slight transformations. So we can say I want instance 1. We can specify the dimensionality of this problem, so the number of input variables. We can, for example, get a 10-dimensional sphere problem. And then we have to specify what kind of problem we're actually looking at. So we are looking at real variables, so a real problem class. And load this, and then we see what is this problem. Well, this problem is a single objective continuous problem. It's problem number 1. Its name is sphere. Its instance ID is 1, and its dimensionality is 10. We can also get this from the problem in terms of its metadata. So we can look at the problem, the metadata, the name, and that's the sphere. In addition to this, the problem also has an internal state that keeps track of things like the number of evaluations done so far, which is 0, whether the optimum has been found, if the optimum is known, which is not the case here, and what the current best solution is. In this case, nothing has been tried, so it's not a number. Then finally, most problems do have bounds. So if a problem has bounds, we can get that by looking at problem.bounds. Here we see we get a lower bound and an upper bound as vectors of the problem dimensionality. And then we can start just evaluating. So here we can just get a random number within the bounds, evaluate it. So it's just as callable as any normal objective function is expected to be. So we can just pass in this x0, and then we can look at what that does to the state of the problem. So now we see the state. There's one evaluation done, the optimum has not been found, and the current best solution is this solution with a certain y value. We can also evaluate a list of points, so we can just say create 5 points between these bounds, evaluate that. And if we want to run algorithms, then we can easily just include this in some kind of loop, because we can also reset the state of the problem. So if we want to say we start a new run, then we can set the number of evaluations, etc. at 0 and start running again. So we can define a simple run experiment function and a simple random search algorithm. So just a simple random search with a certain dimensionality, a certain budget that we give, this n. And all it does is for that budget, it takes a random point. It looks at the norm of this point just to have something that it's keeping track of, and then it evaluates this. So that's all we need. Note that the algorithm here does not need to keep track of the best so far, because it's something that the problem does inherently. So we can run this random search on this problem, and we can see in run 1 the best found is this, run 2 best found is this, etc. So this is the basic functionality if you just care about accessing a problem that is in IOH Experimenter. If you have a problem that is not in IOH Experimenter, you can add this easily. You just need to define your problem. So here we have a function, the Stiblinsky-Tang problem, which is defined as follows. So we just have a basic definition as we would normally make it in Python. So the function, it takes in an array, and it returns this output. And if we evaluate it on the point that is known to be the global optimum, we get this value. So this is all that we need if we have a normal problem we want to use as an objective function. And we can wrap this in IOH by using the wrap real problem, because we take real valued domains here. If you want to do it for integer, then there's an equivalent wrap integer problem. So we just pass it on what is our objective function, what name do we want to give it, Are we supposed to be minimizing or maximizing this problem? And what are the bounds of this problem? So if we do that, it's now wrapped, and we can access it in the same way as we did before. We can just say get problem and pass on the name and say what dimensionality we want to have. So here we see our problem. It's a single objective continuous problem. It has been given problem ID 60. It's this name. Instance is 1 by default. Dimensionality is 10. And if we evaluate it, we get this value, which is exactly the same as the value that we got before. So we have exactly the same kind of object, except now we have the additional metadata and state and everything like this available, because we can see now that this has actually kept track of a state. Note that this does not know the optimum because we did not pass this along. So it's not able to tell us whether we found the optimum or not. But that's something that we can address. So we can add more things to this wrapping to make it a bit more flexible. And one of the things we can add is an instance generation mechanism. And you can do that in many different ways. But one of the ways you could do this is you could move your domain around a bit, or you can multiply your output with some value. And we can do that in the web problem interface as well. So this is something that if you want to know this in more detail, I highly recommend to just play around with it yourself. I will just illustrate the core ideas, not go into the full details of how everything works internally. I'll just show you that if we have some kind of function that can do our transformations, so both in our variable space and in our objective space, where it just takes in the original, the point to be evaluated, and the instance ID, and returns out the new point that should be evaluated internally, then these transformations can be added into the web problem, and then we can get different instances of the problem. So we can get instance 1, instance 2, and when we evaluate them, we will get different outputs. So we see instance 1, instance 2 evaluated at the same point have been transformed using these two functions to give us different outputs. Still the same underlying objective function, just with additional transformation on top. So this is the core part of the problem. And then because this problem can keep track of its state, we can add logging to this problem directly. So the logging attaches to the problem itself, not to the algorithm, so that if you want to work with IOH with your own algorithm, you don't have to modify the algorithm, you just have to add logging to the problem itself. So to do logging, you can get a logger object from IOH. So IOH logger, and then we have different types of logging. The basic one that creates data that is compatible with IOH Analyzer is called the Analyzer logger. And we can just pass it where do we want to store the data, what is the folder name that we should give it, what's the name of the algorithm that is we will associate with this, and some other information like should I store the X positions or only the performance data. In this case, let's store the positions as well. And then see we have created a logger. It's writing to this file. And we can see in our current directory, there's a few things here, but importantly, there's this my experiment folder that I have just created. Then we can create our get our problem, so the one that we defined above. We can add our logger to this, so we can just say attach logger, this logger object, and then we can run this experiment we defined above again. So just running a random search with one run for now. And then when we are finished, we can explicitly make sure to close the logger because the logger tries to be efficient and keep things in memory while as long as needed. So we can explicitly close it. If you run this in any normal Python script or something like this will all be done automatically when the script is finished. But for now, we want to make sure that all of the data has been written. So And we can close it. We can check. We can just briefly get what was the number of our problem, and we can look at what is being written to the file. So in this folder, it has been writing metadata in a JSON file, which is written under the name IOH profiler f, and then the function number, and then the function name as a JSON file. We see here there's some information about IOH, so version number, suite it belongs to, the function ID and name, whether we do maximization, the information about the algorithm if you provided any, and importantly, what were actually the runs and what was being logged in those runs. So these attributes is what data was stored, and these are the scenarios, so what runs were done. We see where is the data stored and what was the result of this. So we ran on instance 1, 10 evaluations. The best was found after 3 evaluations with this y value and this x value. And the corresponding data is written here. So if we look at that data path, then we see we have evaluations, the y value, and then the x values, because we asked to write those as well. So we have at evaluation 1, we had this value, 3, we had this value, then we had this, because by default, we only store the best so far. So we only store when we get an improvement in function value. If you want to get the full log, so for every evaluation, this data, then all you have to do is change the trigger. So that determines when a log is made. So triggers is just an additional part of the logging that you can customize if you want to. So you don't have to bother with this. The data that we have collected here is perfectly feasible, can be written to IOH analyzer, can be uploaded there directly without problems. But if you want more information, then you can do so as well. So you can create different triggers, and you can create combination of triggers. So you can say, I want to always log when I get an improvement, or I want to log every 3 evaluations, or I want to do both, and I just make a list of when I want to record things in my file, and I can make a new logger for this. I just pass it the triggers that I want to use. I can run exactly the same thing that I ran before. So running the experiment, 1 run of random search, and I can look at the data, and now it has logged at 1 and at 2 because there was an improvement. At 3, there was an improvement. 5, there was an improvement. At 6, this is not an improvement, but it's 1 every 3. So at 6 and 9, things were logged as well. 10 is the final function evaluation, so that is always logged to make sure that we know what the budget used is. So this is logging performance. If we want to log more than just performance, we can do that as well. We can look at different properties of, for example, my algorithm. You remember that in our random search algorithm, we had added a property called length, which is the number of 1 bits, or the length of the norm of the variable. Sorry, and this is something that we can say to our logger. We want to keep track of this attribute, so we can say to our logger, watch this object. So this object is our algorithm, and watch the attribute it has called length. And then we can do what we did before. We can just access our problem, add a logger to it, and then run. And then if we look at the data, we see that in addition to the evaluations, the y and the x values we're tracking, we also have this length value recorded, which is the norm of these x values. And if you want to play around with this more, you can even change this logging behavior to different types. You can change it to record in different formats. You can make your own custom logging to do things like just print to the standard output, do anything like this that you want to do with it. There's more things in these examples available in this notebook. If you want to play around with this, there's information there about general interfaces. So we provide a standard interface for running multiple repetitions, multiple functions, instances, etc. with the same logger, or you can do it yourself. Just attach the logger to different function objects. We have information about working with constraints, so you can add constraints just as you have the lower and upper bound of your domain in the BBOB functions we have defined. You also can add custom constraints to this. There's different types of constraints, so you can have different enforcements and you can weigh constraints in different ways. But these are things that I will not go over in detail in this example. So these are just a few ideas of the core behavior. The main things that I want you to take away from this is that we have this problem class that keeps track of not only the problem evaluator itself, so the evaluation function, but also has metadata and a state, so keeping track of what happens to it, how often it gets called and things like this. And attached to that, we can add loggers, and these loggers are what allows us to create the data, and they can be customized to record different attributes, to record at different times, and to record in different kinds of formats. So with this demonstration in mind, let me give you an overview of the different benchmark problems that have been integrated into IOH Experimenter directly. It starts with the pseudo-Boolean optimization problems and the BBOB suite, but we also have different function generators like the W model. We have submodular problems, which includes constraints. So we have support for constraint optimization problem. We have MK landscapes. We have star discrepancy problems. We now have dynamic problems in the form of dynamic binary value. We have a few CEC suites. If there's interest, we are considering to expand this to more sets of these suites as well. And if your problem is not in here, then we provide wrapping functionality to support any discrete or continuous problems. Currently focus on noiseless single objective, but we are working on extending that, and we will talk a bit more about that at the very end. The main functionality of IOH Experimenter, in addition to these benchmark problems, is the logging. And the logging is something that you can then create data to upload to platforms like IOH Analyzer. But because it's a modular design, you can also customize it to your liking. So you can change what kind of behavior you have to decide when to store data or what kind of data you want to store. So things like algorithm parameters you can store, but also any other thing that might evolve either over time or is fixed with your experiments. It will be saved in there as well. You can do this also as CSV. You can just keep everything in memory or compute different statistics on the fly. Like I mentioned before, the empirical attainment function, we have some functionality to calculate measures like this while optimizing your problem. The overall workflow is this. We have some kind of solver that you want to benchmark. We have then our problems, either the built-in ones or the ones that you provide, that you can add our logging to result in whatever data that you are interested in. So all of the interfaces to the built-in problems and to any problems that you add to it are consistent, so you can write your algorithm once. It can work just as any regular algorithm. Just the function object is the thing that keeps track of everything that's needed for the logging to occur properly. So it's a minimal effort to integrate it within any existing algorithm setup. So a few examples of things that you can do with IOH Experimenter. If you want to test algorithms on problems that we have without modifying much of your implementation, then you can just import our package, replace your fitness function with the one that you want to use, attach a logger to it, and run. If you want to know how the algorithms that we provide perform on your own benchmark problems, then same thing basically. Just wrap your own problems with the logging functionality and give it to the algorithm that you want to try, and that will work out of the box. If you want to compare your algorithm to other state-of-the-art algorithms, then you can take your data that you have generated with IOH Experimenter, upload it to IOH Analyzer, and compare it to data from many of the other algorithms that we provide there. So if you want to use IOH Analyzer to look at performance, then the easiest way to do so is to just attach the IOH Experimenter to your benchmarking setup and get the data from it. It's just a few lines of code needed to get data that you get. If you have other things that you want to try with it, or you want to contribute in some way, then it's always welcome. We are very much open to any kind of new collaboration or contribution, and feel free to be in touch. We hope to guide the development based on what the community wants instead of the things that we think that people should be doing. Now that we have seen the main functionality of IOH Profiler, specifically the IOH Experimenter and Analyzer modules, I want to show you a few examples of ways in which we have been using this, ranging from our teaching to student projects and our own research, of course. And I start with teaching because, as I said at the very beginning, benchmarking is often an important component in understanding algorithms and problems alike. And so it's useful if we can give students access to tools that they can use to play around with different algorithms, different problems, so that they can get some understanding of what we are talking about. But this introduction of these benchmarking components to students can be somewhat challenging, especially if you want students to interact with these things. Then implementing everything from scratch will take a lot of time. That detracts from the ability to actually focus on the algorithms and problems that are more interesting for them. And so here, especially the IOH Experimenter module helps by providing some fixed framework with pre-existing examples that the students can play around with, so they do not have to build everything themselves. They can just work from settings that are already there and modify minimal parts of the code so that they can really focus on implementing the algorithm rather than any of the functionality around it to understand what it is doing from a performance perspective. And in addition to this, the IOH Analyzer then enables them to visualize their data in a wide variety of different ways so that they can gain insight into their data. And because it's available as a web interface, this is something that is accessible also to non-expert programmers, which is an issue that we often face when we have students who are, for example, doing a minor in computer science. When they take a course with us, they do not have as much programming experience, so they can still contribute to group work by focusing on doing the analysis of the performance or other behavior of their algorithm. So to focus on some specific examples that we found while teaching, one of the projects that we did is to have the students implement their own objective functions and work with different algorithms to see how modeling their objective problem changes what algorithm works well. So we gave them a problem of inverting the rules for a cellular automaton in a bachelor course on natural computing. And so they had one module within this IOH Experimenter framework. They had to play around with. Everything else they could keep fixed, so they could really zoom in into their own specific part of the project without worrying about all of the things surrounding it. Then for another project, we made it a bit more competitive, and we asked the students to focus on writing good algorithms for specific types of problems. And because we allow them to work within the same framework, we get data from them that's in the same in specific formats that we can then load into IOH Analyzer all together, and then we can compare all of the different submissions automatically, and for example award a bonus point for top 10% algorithms based on aggregated area under a cumulative distribution or something like this. So some aggregated measure that we use to see what algorithms are actually performing the best out of the ones that the students have created. And this is especially helpful if we then also ask them to submit their code, which we do, which allows us to easily replicate the student submissions and give students simple pre-created test functions so they can check their algorithms are actually functioning and achieving minimal acceptable performance levels without having to come to us every time. So we can provide just a package of code that creates tests, etc. automatically. Then we also use this, of course, with student projects. So both in bachelor and master thesis projects, we are often interested in different questions regarding algorithm design, selection, configuration, etc. And having the students work with IOH Profiler reduces the overhead of setting up benchmarking practices and common visualizations and things like this, and allows the focus to lie on the actual research questions rather than everything that might be needed to work with the different algorithms and data, etc. And this also makes transitioning to later scientific papers a lot easier, since we can verify the benchmarking pipeline and we know that different parts have been used that are stable and can be relied on. So if we have a student that makes a very good thesis, it significantly reduces the effort to take things up a level to the point of publishing scientific papers. And then finally, of course, in addition to the benefits we get when working with students, we also benefit from it ourselves. Because the data collection part especially can be used for a wide variety of contexts, and different modules can be swapped in and out depending on what kind of setting we are facing. So for example, if we are doing an algorithm selection study, then we can easily generate data. For example, for a study we did last year, we can combine Nevergraph and IOH together and run a set of algorithms on a set of functions, and use this so that we directly are able to do different types of algorithm selection studies. We can also look at things like dynamic algorithm selection, because we can keep track of more than just algorithm performance. We can look at dynamic attributes, at positions, at whatever else we want during the optimization that we could then potentially use to make decisions about whether we should continue running the algorithm we are running at the moment or switch to something else that might give us more benefit in the end. So we can keep the core data collection parts relatively similar. We just swap out some tracking, and this generates data for quite different types of studies. And even with normal algorithm development, it can be quite useful to just start integrating IOH Profiler directly, because we are able to work with our data, analyze it interactively, and then if we have something we want to use, we can download it directly as LaTeX tables. We can have PDF plots, we can have statistical testing, everything we might need to get the first feeling of how our algorithm compares with others, and start towards creating a paper from this data. I want to highlight a recent new set of benchmark problems that we've added in, which is the MA BBOB problem generator, which is a way of creating weighted affine combination of different BBOB functions with some rescaling and moving of the optimum. that can be used to create large test beds for things like automated algorithm selection. There will be a presentation in the Learning for Evolutionary Computation track about instance selection using this generator testbed, but at its core it's just a way to combine together these different existing benchmarks and generate many new combinations that hopefully share some properties but are not exactly the same as different instances of these very commonly used BPOB functions. Aspects of IOH profiler we want to emphasize is the fact that it can be used to enable large-scale benchmarking to a significant extent. Because the logging functionality is flexible and you can control what kind of data you store and how much, you can use the same kind of setup for running a set of 300 algorithms on BBOB for anytime performance comparison as you would for running 50,000 algorithm configurations on the same set of functions for looking at modular algorithm design. So on the one hand, this first set, 300, relatively small, so we can handle the data quite well. So we can keep track of a lot of the data and calculate our performance measures afterwards. But for the 50,000 configurations, we changed the logging setup to record our anytime performance measure on the fly. So we end up with using a lot less data for this, so we can support the whole set of algorithm configurations. So this is really the key reason why our design is set up in this modular way. We can take different parts and pieces from the benchmarking pipeline and swap them out for different ones and go from between different scales of study, between different performance measures, between different setups, different functions, different algorithms, etc., while keeping the core thing flexible and keeping the data usable no matter what we want to do with it afterwards. And that means that IOH is a benchmarking tool that can be adapted to a variety of different scenarios, and thus we can integrate different benchmark suites into IOH Experimenter, provide some baselines, and easily set up different competitions. We can provide a few baselines ourselves, set up some templates for creating tables using IOH Analyzer, and we can then load all of our data in at the end to see what entry wins different competitions. So currently there's 3 competitions ongoing at this Gecko. We have submodular optimization, star discrepancy, and MA BPOB, where you can come to the competition slot later on to see a bit more about these different setups. And then, of course, IOH Profiler would only be possible thanks to our different collaborations. So this is really the way that we decide what aspects to work on, is to see what do people actually want to have and what do people want to help us integrate. For example, we have been integrating IOH Experimenter with Paradiso. We have integrated deep statistical comparison in IOH Analyzer, the W model in IOH Experimenter, integration of IOH Experimenter into Nanograd. The recent dynamic binary value problems have been integrated, and this is the way that we are most likely to add new types of functionality to it. Is if people tell us this would be cool to have, this is something that we would enjoy playing around with, then we're always open for new collaborations to start. And we're always interested in adding new components to IOH profiler as a whole, one of the recent things we've been working on is IOH Explainer, which is a tool that we've been using to easily integrate methods from explainable machine learning to our algorithm design. So our modular algorithms have a lot of different parameter settings. So we have made an easy setup to integrate these explainability techniques and get a sense of this module is contributing this much on these specific functions. So it's something that, again, is separate from the rest of the IOH profiler. It's not something you need if you are using IOH in any way, but it's something you can always add on top of your design to get a feeling for how different parameters influence performance on different kinds of functions. So IOH profiler at this point is a relatively stable tool with different modules that are in use by hopefully quite a few of you. And we're always trying to extend the repository of available algorithms, problems, data that we have available, and to keep working to integrate with different tools that the community is actively using. We don't want to be a monolith that controls all of the benchmarking that you do. We just want to be able to support different interactions with tools so people have the flexibility to use Coco's data generation with our post-processing, or our data generation with the way that with Navigraph results, etc. So interfaces between tools is one thing that we really want to focus on. So if you have a tool that you think would be cool to make work together with one of the modules of IOH Profiler, we're always happy to hear about this. And one of the next things in the pipeline is extensions to multi-objective problems, which will go together with a new Python package for IOH Analyzer, so that offline use for people with a lot of data starts to become easier. So this will not replace the IOH Analyzer website, but this will be an additional package that people can use to get similar kinds of functionality on their local data. To wrap this up, I want to just pose a few different questions to you, and if you have any answers or questions, then you can always contact us and we will be very happy to talk about this or see you at Gecko or one of the other conferences where we will be at. And main things are, what can we do to make benchmarking tools, in particular IOH Profiler, help to promote things like reproducibility? We feel that having tools be accessible is one of the main ways you can make the barrier to fully reproducible code a lot lower, because you don't have to from scratch create all of the benchmarks. You can just set it up within a certain pipeline and use that directly, and make benchmarking quite robust. So any other features that would make IOH Profiler fit your specific use case better, we're always happy to know. We want to build this in the direction that people would find useful. So we're always happy to hear what you think could be included, and what ways we can collaborate to make benchmarking as simple and as useful as possible. And one of the aspects in this is data sharing, which is an aspect of reproducibility, but also an aspect of just building a better way of handling all of the data that is generated from the vast variety of different studies we see here at Gecko. And that is something that is independent from IOH Profiler, but it's something that we are trying to investigate and to push forward. Especially Carola is leading this. That is something that we are currently calling OpenOpt. It would be an independent data sharing platform for benchmark data, which would not just be performance data, but also annotations and potentially more information about the algorithms, problems, etc. This is in the early phases, but if you have any interest in discussing data sharing and reproducibility and interoperability between different tools, we are very happy to have you join these discussions. So that's been all for me. You can always reach us by email, speak to us at the conference, and we will be happy to hear your thoughts.